大家好，我们应该可以开始了。好，现场 OK， 可以。All right, let's get started. So, I am Professor John Liu. It's my great honor and pleasure to be the host of this event. So today we are welcoming Professor Michael Bell from University of Wisconsin-Madison to give a talk on non-political politics from nature to religion to heritage in our speaker series. And as some of you may know, Professor Bell is my PhD supervisor. So I spent wonderful time with him during my PhDs and also during my sabbatical to Madison last year. And so it's really a rare occasion and very honored that I can invite him to visit where his student is now teaching. So it's really means a lot to me as well. And so I will give you a brief introduction of Professor Bell before he gets into his talk. So in today's talk, he's trying to do something quite tremendous. He's trying to combine 3 of his books. Right, so the first book is Childerley, that's based on your dissertation research a long time ago. And the second book is this one, City of the Good. And another one, forthcoming next year on our, I have my notes here, on Our Blood, the Social Experience of Heritas. So the 3 books have connecting themes. And Professor Bell will try to connect the dots today. And besides the 3 books, he's super prolific. He has authored 10 books, including this very popular environmental sociology textbook, which is now in the 7th edition.
6, but we're working on the 6th.
This is a 6th edition. So if any of you are interested in these books, you can come to me after. I can pass this around, but you can always come to me. I can share. And I think a short introduction is enough, but I think I do want to mention Mike is, besides his academic life, he is a dedicated musician. He composes and performs guitar and mandolin mainly, right? And he writes classical grass music with progressive themes. So during my time in my last year visit, I was in a concert twice, and more times in my during my PhD, I've seen many live performances. So he's also a musician, which is a very important part of his life. Yeah. So if you're into music, I think you will also find very nice conversation with him after the talk. So we do have a reception to follow at 2 o'clock. So after the talk, we're welcome to stay and mingle and learn and chat more on the topic. All right, so without further ado, let's welcome Professor Michael Bell.
Thank you, John, for that generous introduction. You know, but after you lived in our house for a month last year, and while we were away, and took care of our cat and our chickens, when you invited me, of course I had to repay that favor, so. But I did not know how beautiful Taiwan is, and I've only seen a very small amount just from the airport into the city on the train there, and the mountainsides and the woods and all the gardens that people have, a lot of the rooftop gardens. I was so delighted with that. And then also delighted to discover a little bit of a rooftop garden here in the department with beautiful spices and herbs like this one. I particularly like this one, whatever the name of it is here, but that one was really good. I don't know. I took a little piece of something in there, maybe to inspire me with the talk a little bit. Well, anyway, yes, so let's go off on this journey through 3 books of mine. One of them, yes, it started as it was my doctoral dissertation. Came out in 1994. And then this other book, where I kind of got back, as I'll explain, to some of the same themes, but taking it from how people think about nature to how people think about religion. And then this new book, which is co-authored with 2 colleagues of John's that he'll remember well, 2 former PhD students that graduated the very same year that John did. Loka Ashwood and Jay Orn. This book will come out next year. It has this new word that we're trying to promote a little bit. Does this pointer work? Doesn't seem to. Doesn't matter. Anyway, Heritas there. Our Blood, the Social Experience of Heritas. All right, but let's get the thing going here. And your pointer doesn't work anymore. What did I do? Tell me what I did. Okay, I'll just do that then. Just do that. Co-author with Jay. Yes, okay. Right, now, let us start with a very common moment in everyone's life. Maybe you even had this moment today. Right, when you start to talk to somebody, and thank you, and they said something that really just shut the conversation down. Or maybe you said something, yes, maybe you, or maybe somebody else said something to shut the conversation down because you just didn't want to deal with it and say, get out of my space. I am right in what I'm saying. Don't bother me. And this happens on a micro level of individual human interactions, and also happens on a very macro level. And we're going to talk about that. So one of the ways, a very common way that we try to shut conversation down and say, hey, you can't disagree with me, and I'm not biased, I'm not being political, I'm not trying to get anything over on you, is through what I like to call externalization. An old habit of mind in which we try to shut the conversation about our disagreements down by claiming that our contentions are not coming from us, but are external to us. So you can't blame me. This is what I like to call non-political politics, because it really is a kind of politics, both at a micro level and at a big macro level, and every level in between, where we say it's not politics, but it is. Claiming to locate our identities and our motivations in the external of nature, the divine, and the embodied heritage that we get from the past. And let me know if I'm going out of the range of your camera. All right. Because I like to move around. All right, so let us start with this book, Childerley, 1994 book there. Now I want to take you to the beauty of the English countryside. Maybe you've been there, maybe you've seen pictures, you'll see some pictures now. And how peaceful, colorful it is, how natural it is. You want to go there, don't you? Yeah, yeah. Look at that. Nice. Nice house. Nice house. I want that house. Well, I'll take that one. That would be good, too. Sweet. Except for this. $1.1 million. That's what this lists for. Yeah, I don't think even your faculty members could afford it. How about this one? Currently listed for $2.7 million. Or this one. This is all in the area of Childerley, as I'll explain. You can buy Jane Austen's family house for sale in 2023. I think it's sold now. I think it might be too late. But it was for sale for $10.3 million US dollars. These are in US dollars, right? So this is a little bit of an issue, actually, because what it means is that those who can access this sense of nature out in the countryside need to be very wealthy, except in special circumstances that I'll explain in a moment. But it's a bit of a problem for someone Because say you're from England, as I'm sure you've heard, England is famously a class-based society, right? But you know, when you say that England is a class-based society, you're not complimenting it. You're saying that's actually wrong. So now imagine you are an English person. And this primary source of social identity that your society is granting to you is something that others, and probably even you a little, at least a little bit, and maybe a lot of it, think is wrong. So this leads to a real moral problem, a moral ambiguity about social class, because maybe you experience it here in Taiwan too. People have aspirations, they want to rise up, yes, but at the same time, you're all sociologists, right? We're worried about hierarchy, aren't we? So those motivations to go up are also motivations, if you're not very careful about how you do it, to also push back down. So this leads to a very fundamental problem that isn't true just in England. I've only been in Taiwan for 7 hours, less than 7, I think 6.5 hours. But I imagine some of this goes on here too. I think it goes on in a lot of places in our so-called modern world, where we aspire to this primary source of identity, but we think it's a bad thing. Now, it's no less morally ambiguous for those, at least in the village of Childerley, that I studied and did my doctoral dissertation in, for those more on the bottom of the social scale. Because for them, people see them as lower, they're working class, and you can live out in that countryside in Childerley. Because of a special thing in England, they have a form of public housing they call council housing, which is available in the countryside. So there are working class people who live in these villages with houses that cost $2, $3, $4, and $5 million. So they're not completely priced out, but they're still there, and they see those people with those big fancy houses around them, and they experience that notion of class. But they don't think they're any lesser than anybody else. So it's not comfortable for them either. It's not morally comfortable for anyone anywhere in that ladder. Anyone with any social conscience, that is. Now, yeah, so what are you going to do? Now, the residents of Childerley, this village that I studied so many years ago, told me constantly that they had another basis for their grounding their sense of self than social class, a basis that was very important to them and that they felt was not morally ambiguous, that was clear and good, innocent of the political, and that was the sense of themselves as country people who live closer to nature. Yes, because there they are living in a rural village. And from this, they gained a sense of what in the book I called a natural me. A me who is the me that nature sees, the natural other sees. And nature, of course, is free of politics, isn't it? We'll come back to that. Anyway, so maybe some of you have studied this. Do you folks teach George Herbert Mead and Emil Durkheim around here? I've heard of these people. All right, okay. So Durkheim used to talk about this thing he called the collective conscience, the totality of beliefs and sentiments common to the average members of a society. And then George Herbert Mead, shortly after that, said, well, I think the way this works out is between a sense that we have in our head of a generalized other, everyone out there who's looking at me. So he distinguished between the generalized other and the me. And that's basically what I felt the people of Childerley were doing, except for they were seeing it through nature. This parallel interplay of a sense of natural other and natural me. But they found that attractive because for them, they got the sense that that collective conscience and the me that it sees was in fact political. Because that was the collective that was looking at me and seeing me, oh, as some rich, fancy person who's just trying to show off, or maybe some working class person at the bottom of the heap. But no, I'm not either of those. What I am is a country person, a person who lives close to nature. That's the real, true me. And that's the me that nature sees, not the me that society sees, at least in how they think about it. So this becomes this way of gaining another sense of social self that is free of the social, or so you think, is particularly powerful and potent and attractive when you are in situations of social conflict and where you think that there are so many politics out there in the social in the way that you are constructing me. Right? And that's not the real me. No, you can't look at me that way. This natural me is the real me. And then you can carry on with a sense of dignity and pride in who you are. And I don't mean pride in a negative sense, a sense of comfort with yourself. Right, a sense of Childerley's residents that they're unarguably country people who live closer to nature and follow nature's ways and therefore are not political, a less morally ambiguous basis for self than social class. Even if you were a wealthy enough person to ride in the hunt, if you're familiar with what I'm talking about in English society. So rich people get together on the weekends. They all have horses because they're rich, and they go riding out in the countryside and chase foxes. It's not very nice for the fox. No. But anyway, but they're country people. They're not just showing off that they are rich enough to own a horse. No, they're getting in touch with their natural me, or at least as they think about it. Okay, so this natural me raises a bit of a question. All right, I'll stay closer to this. I'll be good. Are we part of nature or not? And there's a little bit of a contradiction here. And it goes like this. There's kind of two basic ways that we wind up thinking about nature. And here I'm talking mainly about ideas that come out of Western thought, but we'll get to Eastern thought in a little bit. And we'll find that there's some parallels. So one is a sense of holism, that we are part of nature. And the other is a sense of separatism. We're not part of nature. In a way, we kind of need them both. Because if we're part of nature, then nature is morally relevant. Do you see, right? We're part of nature, so doing things the natural way is relevant to us. But if we're part of nature, then we must already be doing everything naturally. So how can I then use nature as a source of moral instruction? It needs to be morally different from us in order for me to say, John, would you please act more naturally? Right? So that implies that he's not acting naturally already, so he must have a sense of difference. But at the same time, you also have to establish a sense of relevance. So you've got these two things going on at once, and it works out in that natural me and natural other. So the natural me, that is a holist thing, that makes it morally relevant, but that natural other, that needs to be a little bit different. And so then we have this issue in our thought about nature, which is that we seem to want to have it both ways, that we are both part of nature and not. Now, a common argument, though, is, John, it would be a good thing if you would follow nature, act naturally, right? And if you did, then you would finally be beyond criticism. Because if you're acting naturally, then I can't criticize you anymore. You're just being yourself the way you really are. Right. So I got thinking about this notion that it is good to follow nature. Well, that seems obvious enough, yes. But where does that idea of the good come from? Have we always had this? And the more I looked into it, the more I got the sense that actually, no, it's a relatively new idea. Got me thinking about the origin of the good. Right. So, a relatively recent, this turned me towards religion because I started noticing Christianity. A lot of talk about Jesus is good. A lot of talk about that. A lot of talk about the Buddha is good too. And both those traditions emerge at a very similar time, and as I'll explain, in very similar contexts as well. Which got me to the sense of this notion of the good is, well, what's the phrase we like? Social construction, right? But of a very powerful sort, as we'll see. And as well, it arises in class-dominated life of urban empires, right? At least that's when it finally took off. What got Christianity really going? But the Roman Empire. What got Buddhism really going? The Emperor Ashoka. And we'll come back to that in a minute, why that might be the case. I came to call these bourgeois faiths. Bourgeois in the sense of that these are faiths that arise in the context of urbanizing empires, where social class is starting to become much more important. Because as you urbanize and then you have an empire, then all the money starts pouring into a city, you know, like Taipei, right? All of this stuff, it came from someplace. It's an accumulation of wealth. We're sitting, and in my case standing, on an accumulation of wealth. Because what is the urban but the rural piled high? So it's an accumulation, and there's a stratification, just like the floors in this building that so often come along with it. Okay, so this got me to this next book, City of the Good. John's got the copy of it there. You pass it around, John. I don't know. People look at it. I have a copy of Childerley, but I left it downstairs. Now, let's talk about these bourgeois religions, because they have a lot of, and there's several of them. There are three that did particularly well, but there's a bunch of them. And they have a lot of ideas in common. So, the most obvious one is that the divine is good. And because it is good, it is impartial. And therefore, not political. Very central, for example, in Christianity, for those of you who are familiar with Christianity, the whole notion of God as impartial. It's all over the New Testament. And of course, so much about Jesus as good, the good shepherd and all of that. Another thing about these ideas, and these are, if you think about it, yes, this is obvious, doesn't everybody? This is what religion is. But actually, no, not all religions are like this. The divine is absolute. God the Father. And you can't argue with God the Father. God the Father is omniscient, knows everything, all-powerful. No, you can't argue with him. And the divine is also universal. This is a relatively new idea. The divine is universal. Oh, and I'm the Emperor Constantine. You're coming to me with this idea of Christianity. Oh, right. Universal, just like the Roman Empire, like the Roman Empire should be. Hey, I like that idea. I'm on board with that. Hey, let's go with that. Yeah, it's the only true divine, just like it's the only empire that there should be. That's good. Applies to everybody. Divine is transcendent, abstract, removed, not immanent and concrete. So not in the herbs, not in the trees, not in all those wonderful shrines, which I hope I'm going to see when we go out into the countryside here in Taiwan. But no, is beyond that, up in the sky, removed from us. And that removal is necessary because that's how the divine becomes impartial. Because it's not like us. It's not part of us. Because if it's real immanent, it's also immanent. That means in things. Then it's too much like us. And remember, God the Father. God the Father. Buddha, represented as a man, right? Okay. So the divine went male. And why? Well, because men are boss. So it fits with that, doesn't it? Female divines disappeared, right? Mary, the mother of Jesus, not a God. Jesus is, and God the Father is, and then there's this Holy Spirit thing. But they talked about this when they were coming up with Christianity, and there are actually some early branches of Christianity where Mary was divine, but that's not the one that the Roman Empire went with. Why? Maybe because Constantine was a man. Yeah, and also, central, wealth is bad, sex is bad. That's where evil and sin, and fundamentally where politics comes from. Desire for money and sex. And desire is bad in this view. But the divine isn't swayed by wealth and does not engage in sex. Jesus doesn't do sex. You ever noticed that? Doesn't do sex. He doesn't do money either. You can't go to Jesus and say, hey, if I make a big sacrifice, then you'll be nice to me, right? Here's some money. I'll put it on the altar. Actually, the Catholics were doing that for a little while in the middle, about 1,000 years ago, and this guy by the name of Martin Luther said, I don't think that's a good idea. But 500 years ago again, not 1,000 years ago. But basically, that's the idea. You can't buy God off, right? And yeah, God doesn't do sex. And like, okay, God the Father and the Son, well, if we're going to do that, how are we going to manage that because God doesn't do sex? How can we have Jesus be the Son of God if God doesn't do sex? Oh, I know, Immaculate Conception. Let's do that. Yes, we'll have a visitation of the Holy Spirit. That'll take care of it. And what is the parallel in Buddhism? Anybody here know how the Buddha was conceived? Okay. His mother, Virgin Mother. Yeah. And the divine is sent down with an elephant in the form of a tiny elephant. Yeah. I think actually the Christians got the idea from the Buddhists. They had the idea several hundred years earlier, actually. Anyway, yeah. Buddha doesn't do sex either. Nope. Gave that up. Doesn't do wealth either, remember? He left the palace. I don't know how much you all know about Buddhism, but this is yeah. You probably know a little bit about it. Probably more than I do. All right, so, yes, another thing. The divine in these traditions is very little concerned about issues of ecology and sustenance. Jesus doesn't start any new harvest festivals. That's not what Jesus is about, right? Jesus is about sin Sin, not green things. And as I'll come to, nature is a problem that needs to be overcome. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, ideas commonly associated with the earlier pagan religions. Now, pagan, that is a word that just means from the countryside. It's a Latin word, means somebody from the countryside. Now, in those earlier traditions, the divine is emotional, unpredictable, partial, political, and not necessarily good. Think of, for example, the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, as Christians call it. Think of the God figure there. He has an anger management problem. Or think Zeus. Zeus has an anger management problem too. And if you cross Zeus, he comes at you with a thunderbolt. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. Right. They're very political too. Arguing with each other, arguing with other gods, not necessarily good at all. Actually, the divine is not absolute, though. It can be argued with. And there's lots of examples of myths where a human goes and argues with a divine figure and actually changes the divine figure's mind. You can even see it in the Old Testament, too. Several cases where people go to God and try to persuade God to chill out. Right, when he wanted to destroy all the Israelites, and then Moses said, hey, come on, chill out, God. Right. That doesn't happen in the New Testament. Different people have their own divinities, and that's fine. Hey, you've got your God, I've got my God. That's okay, you're different people. That's fine, I understand that. I can work with that. That's okay. God is immanent. He's in things, in statues. You can have idols, and that idol is very real. There's a real presence in that. There's special places where the divine is, and there's other places where the divine is not. And you can interact with it directly. Divine can be male, female, and non-binary, actually, as well. Many examples of that. Wealth and sex, they're fine. Sex is good, no problems with that. Money, yeah, we're all poor. What's wrong with having a little bit more money? Yeah, that's okay. And I'm a god, so yeah, give me some sacrifices. I want that. And yeah, and by the way, I think you're hot. And I'm going to have sex with you because the divinities have wealth and sex, and they even enjoy sex with humans. Many, Zeus, for example, there's myths like, I think it's 39 different humans in various myths that have come down to us that Zeus has sex with. Males and females. He had wide taste. And instead of desire, the great sin is disloyalty. But you got a problem on your farm? Okay, go to the divine and ask for some help. And nature needs to be respected, not rejected, because we are entangled with it. Okay, so yeah, there's Ishtar. Ishtar is, at one time, was actually the lead divinity of ancient Sumerian religions, goddess of love and war. Some people say they're both sides of the same thing. And fertility. Oh, and there's Zeus throwing one of his thunderbolts. You better duck. Political gods. They led wealthy, sexy lives. Think of the images of where the gods live in those ancient traditions. Big, beautiful palaces up on top of Mount Olympus. Yeah. They have plenty of money. A lot of sex. A lot of jealousy over that too with each other. Yeah, but don't be disloyal. Then I'm going to get angry and I'm going to throw a thunderbolt at you. And yeah, that's, at least as far as humans are concerned, that's not good at all. But very concerned with issues of sustenance and nature, except for one thing. Nature did not yet exist. So let's switch to this now. Because as I started looking at the rise of these bourgeois religions, I noticed that nature doesn't really exist. The very word nature, in fact, is not even in the Old Testament. There's no word nature in the Old Testament. Only shows up in the New Testament. I want to talk about the cultural history of three natures. First nature, which is actually our earliest uses of the concept of nature, but it was used as a sense of something's true and unchanging character, how it first came into the world before any kind of modification by anybody. Second nature is that first nature makes nature good, morally good. And it's something humans should try to follow. And it's good because it hasn't been manipulated, because any manipulation, of course, is a form of politics, and we know that's bad. Third nature, and I'll come to this in a little bit too, flip this around. Actually, nature can be a moral bad, something that humans should try to overcome. So here's the very first occurrence of the word nature. It occurs in Odyssey in Book 10, where Odysseus's men had all been turned into pigs by the sorceress Circe. And Odysseus asks Hermes, what am I going to do? And Hermes says, well, go find this herb. We've been talking about herbs. I don't know if we have this one in Taiwan, probably not. Draw it from the ground. It showed me its nature. At the root, it was black, but its flower was like milk. That right there is the very first use that we have of the word nature. So, how a thing can be known, its permanent qualities by which it can be forever known. The way things were born into the world without any subsequent alterations, something's true and unchanging character, its true nature, as we sometimes still use that word. Now we're in the 8th century BCE. And you can see it in the very origin of the words nature. So in Greek, the word nature came from a verb to be and derived, which in turn became phyen, to give birth. So literally, the word physis, which we know in English words like physics, metaphysical, right? Having a physical examination literally means how a thing was born into the world. And yeah, they came up with this word for it back when that's exactly what nature meant, how a thing was first born into the world. The word nature in English actually comes from a Latin translation of that. The Romans loved the Greek philosophers, and so they took a Greek word, a Latin word, nasi, to mean to be born, and combined it with the result of, so it meant the result of being born. Does anybody know an English word that uses this root that's not the word nature? Can you think of any? Oh, I'll give you a few quick. The word nation, the word natal, right? Nativity, which directly mean birth. Okay, so the next idea, nature is a moral good. Since it hasn't been altered by humans, it is good because it's therefore free of human desire and ambition and therefore free from politics, because politics is what's bad. Emerges around the 4th century BCE. And why this new use of nature? Well, you're at a time of emergence of massive inequality associated with the rise of cities and states and bourgeois life, in the sense that social life was manipulated for political gain. We can see it in this play from 388 BCE, the line here. The way life is arranged for us humans, who would not regard it as sheer insanity and even more sheer wretchedness? Many men are wealthy who are wicked, having amassed it by crime, and many who are very virtuous are in a bad way. Does not everything depend on wealth? Maybe it sounds a little bit like our present day. But here, this vision of nature as the good directly parallels the simultaneous rise of religions of the good in the growing urban empires, except they didn't imagine it as divinities, but philosophically, it's kind of the same concept. Powerful idea that's still with us. And then there's Henry David Thoreau. Anybody ever heard of Henry David Thoreau here? A few people have. Anyway, he wrote this book in 1862 called Walking, and this is how he talked about nature. Oh, he lived in the shack out in the woods, which you can go visit. It's in Massachusetts. This was the time of the American Civil War, which was a time of immense social tension, a sense of social life that has just gone horrible and is certainly completely permeated with politics, and huge death tolls in some of the battles. And this is where he found some other way to think about life. I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture merely civil, to regard man as an inhabitant or a part and parcel of nature, rather than a member of society. Man and his affairs, church and state, and school and trade and commerce and manufactures and agriculture, even politics, the most alarming of them all. I am pleased to see how little space they occupy in the landscape where he was out in the woods. Because in 1/2 hour out in the woods, I can walk off to some portion of the earth's surface where a man does not stand from one year's end to another, and there consequently politics are not, for they are but as the cigar smoke of a man. Okay, so very ambivalent nature. In this one sense, he's saying we are part of nature, part and parcel of nature, excuse me, I got to get it back here, but also that we are not, oh, there it is, we're not part of nature, because nature is wild, not social, he says. Man and his affairs are alarming, right? And most alarming them all is politics, because what is, yeah, so all of this is not natural at all. Politics, man and his affairs are not nature. So that part of us is not part of nature. And there's his natural me, and there's his natural other, and his natural conscience. And through this, we get moral relevance through connection, part and parcel of nature, and we get moral goodness through separation if we follow nature. Which is why we want it both ways, to be both part of and apart from nature. But now let's take this a little closer to home where we are right now. Let's talk about this guy here. Lier, a.k.a. Lao-Tzu. Excuse me, my pronunciation is abominable, I know. Or Lao-Tzu, old teacher, or venerable master. Now, he is writing at the time of the Warring States period, an enormous social conflict that was eventually won by the Qin, which is why China is called China. I don't know if you all knew that. It's because the Qin won. And not the Zhao. Anyway, it was an awful time. And he said, I'm done with it. I'm going to be, just like Thoreau was going to do 1,500 years or 2,000 years later, and go off the shack in the woods. He said, no, I'm going to get on my buffalo, and I'm just leaving. But on the way out, the keeper of the pass was pleased and said to him, as you're about to leave the world behind, could you write a book for my sake? And as a result, Lao-Tzu wrote a work in 2 books, setting out the meaning of the way and virtue, Tao and Day, in some 5,000 characters, and then departed. No one knew where he went in the end. And this is what he said. The Tao that can be told. Am I right? Oh, I'll stay here. I'll be good. Okay. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you only see the manifestations. And it's the problem of desire, isn't it? And the problem of politics, right there. The Tao is free from the social and its politics. And following the Tao frees you from that. And this distinction between wu-wei and yu-wei, non-doing and doing. In the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added, and in the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. And when nothing is done, nothing is left undone. So throw away holiness and wisdom and the people will be happier. Throw away morality and justice and people will do the right thing, right? Because morality and justice, that's all social. Throw away industry and profit and there won't be any thieves. And if these three aren't enough, just stay at the center of the circle and let all things take their course. To non-doing. The master leads by emptying people's minds and filling their cores, by weakening their ambition and toughening their resolve. He helps people lose everything they know, everything they desire, and creates confusion in those who think that they know. Practice not doing, and everything will fall into place. And the next time you are late on an assignment in Professor Liu's class, you need to say this: "Hey, I was just being Taoist." Trying to free us from the political. All right, so know the personal, key to the impersonal. If you accept the world, the Tao will be luminous inside you, and you will return to your primal self, right? So this is the day part. Day part, that is the self that the Tao sees. The Taoist natural other and natural me. Now, third nature. Let's get the third nature here. Okay, that is nature as the bad. And we see this very strongly in Christianity, the famous parable of Jesus going off into the wilderness and is tempted by the devil. And he's Jesus, so the devil doesn't win on that. But look at how, right, we think, because Jesus doesn't do desire. He's good instead. He rises above all of that. But look at how we think about, in Christianity, how we think about the devil. It's all this animal stuff and not the bits of animals that we usually think well of. Claws, tails, sharp teeth, bat wings. We don't like bats. Right? So this is representing nature as the devil. And that's because what is making you wicked is because of your nature. And you need to overcome that. It's the basic argument here. And from there we also go to, we need to subjugate all of nature, not just overcome it in ourselves, but overcome it in the world itself. This is a slide I show in my agroecology classes. Okay, so what we're seeing here is different social contexts. So we have pagan faiths for pagan lives, and then bourgeois faiths, including the ideas like nature, Tao, and Dharma, for bourgeois lives. And bourgeois faiths for bourgeois empires, the association of all major bourgeois faiths with empires that promoted them. So I mentioned earlier, Emperor Constantine, Emperor Ashoka, Prophet Muhammad. Islam is a little bit more complicated, but we can talk about that later if we have time for any questions. All right, now, that's 2 books. Now I'm going to rush through the 3rd book. This one hasn't come out yet, but we'll soon. I want to talk about blood. Our blood, your blood. And this concept that we are promoting in the book, what we call Heritas. Do you folks teach habitus here in this department? So it's meant to be a kind of related concept. We thought we'd use a word that sounds more or less in that same family of words. But what it means is when people have social relations that they contend they did not choose, but that instead descend from an embodied past, more simply, embodied heritage. Right? Because if it came from the past, I can't have chosen it for my own benefit. There's no politics behind that. What happened in the past is what happened. And I didn't choose what's in my body. Right? That's my parents and everything that came from before them. Right? So when we say something is part of our embodied heritage, our past that everybody has, then I'm doing that same kind of thing where I'm putting it out beyond my own choice in the sense that I'm being political. And it works out in a few different ways that we talk about here. Right, there's that embodied sense of heritage, the first dimension, and a distinction we make in this book between natural blood and generated blood. Now, natural blood is when we believe that our heritage, our nature is physically present in the nature of our body. But we also often believe that something is embodied, but isn't embodied in that same way. We know it to be a kind of a bit of a metaphor. Like maybe, John, do you think of me as a kind of a father figure? Maybe a little bit. So, right, okay, so he's brought me here, right? John's my student, former student, right? And so we start thinking about social relations that there was nothing genetic going on here, right? Okay. But we still think of so many of our relations in this way. Or even think of the whole notion of God the Father, right? We're children of God, aren't we, in Christianity? But we don't think of it that way. We embody it. We take the blood in the cup. All right, in communion, we take the wafer and we take it inside and embody it that way, but we don't really think there's a genetic connection. That's what we mean by generated blood. And it's very common. Now, this gets us to non-political politics in two ways. Naturalization that we've already talked about in Childerley and all that first, second, third nature stuff, but also non-political politics through historicization by saying it was in the past where I couldn't have chosen it myself. Now, this is ideology because you don't really know what went on in the past. There's an old blues song which has the title of Nobody Knows But Your Mama, and she might be jiving you too, if you know the word jiving. She might be fooling you too, right? Nobody knows but your mama, and she might be fooling you too. Because you don't know what went on in the past. And you think about courts of law, that's what they're all about, is trying to figure out what went on in the past. It's actually very hard to figure out what went on in the past. And it turns out all kinds of things are surprises. We don't really know. So it's ideology. But it's a powerful ideology. It is a source of some of the most meaningful emotions that we have, some of the most beautiful, wonderful things that we ever do for each other, but also some of the most awful things. Deeply felt ideology, what we call in the book a felt ideology. It's also spirited. There's a sense of presence, the sense of I have a feeling of presence of my parents in my body. Sometimes I might see myself moving in a certain way, and I think, oh, that's just how my mother moved, isn't it? Oh, there I am. I'm doing that thing just like my parents. So a sense of presence, a kind of a ghost within. It structures a lot of our social organization, structures family life, structures whole nations, the notion of distinction of nations, notion of ethnic groups, of really awful things like caste systems and apartheid and things of this sort, which in turn shapes our felt ideology, which then leads us to redo that social organization again. And it's highly selective, but not random. but very selective, because there are so many possibilities in your past of what you could pay attention to. And there's so many things that we forget, often deliberately. What are the ones that we focus on? Most typically, those that arise from the history of our social conflicts. Those are the ones that get us worried. And so we don't forget those. And they're bonds of belongingness, but also bonds that bind. Because this heritas could be something I attest to, right? But it could also be something that you assert on me. So I might both feel a sense of belongingness out of this, but also a sense of being bound and stuck in it because of what you're saying to me. All right, let me just give an example here as I finish up with my co-author, Loka Ashwood. John, I don't know if you ever met their kids. So Loka married an Irishman, Jason. Lovely, lovely guy. Beautiful man. Love Jason. Love their kids too. Fantastic family. And yeah, Jason's Irish. And they think of their kids as both Irish and American. But what is it to be Irish? Wait, there's an island there. Ireland, okay. And you know, you can send your genetics off to some genetic testing service and ask, what percent Irish am I? What percent Fijian am I? What percent Filipino am I? Right? What percent indigenous Taiwanese am I? And they will send you something back and they will say, yes, these percentages. But why did you ask about those things? Why do we think of Ireland as something that's worth talking about as some separate identity that we would want to measure? I mean, after all, it's not very far from Great Britain. That's only about 12 miles of water there. You say, oh, they're separate islands. That makes sense. Well, that doesn't make sense. Think of the Philippines. They have many, many islands. They all think of it as one nation. Think of Indonesia. Think of New Zealand, North Island, South Island. They're about the same distance apart. They think of it all as one country. No. Well, why is it? Well, because the English, for 1,000 years, have been trying to colonize the Irish. And during the famous Irish potato famine, which you've probably heard about, the English were insisting that the Irish continue to send them wheat to England, which made people starve even more. And people haven't forgotten that. They're still angry about it. So we pay attention to that because it has been the basis of social conflict. And maybe the basis of social conflict in the end. Again, which raises questions. What lines do we draw? And you might ask, look here, there's not very much distance between here and France. And then once you're in France, you can walk all the way to the bottom of Africa, and you won't get your feet wet except when you're crossing a river. Or you could walk all the way to Kamchatka. You could walk all the way to China. What lines do we draw? What lines do we forget? What lines have we never drawn? Indeed, these are three questions that I believe Taiwan confronts every day. Am I right? Okay, so what have I been talking about? This stuff is not in our blood, it is of our blood. There are stories we say of our blood, but they're highly selective, but deeply felt nonetheless. And why do we put them in our blood? Because we want to avoid politics. But we cannot escape politics. Nor should we attempt to hide it in nature, religion, and the embodied past. That is no escape. For the problem is not politics itself. Politics should be and could be just us working out how best to get along with each other and with the planet. Right? It could and should be that. But it's not. No. The problem is not politics. The problem is injustice. But that can only be addressed with politics. But with a better politics of recognition, of mutualism, care, and the never-ending dialogue of our differences. We cannot externalize justice. Because justice is us. And because justice is joyous.